The wind carried the scent of sweat, dust, and pine sap through the town of Rust Creek as the townsfolk gathered, boots crunching over gravel and dry earth. The sun, merciless and unblinking, hung over the gallows like a judge peering down from heaven, and not one soul among them dared speak louder than a whisper. The sheriff stood stiffly at the edge of the platform, his hand on the butt of his Colt, squinting past the brim of his weather-worn hat. There, between two deputies, walked the condemned man, Elijah Ward. He was a tall figure, though thinner than most remembered. The old fire that once burned behind his eyes had dulled, but hadn't died. His face was drawn, his cheek bruised, lip cracked, and a thin scar traced the line of his jaw, half hidden beneath the scruff of a month's beard. But he walked straight. No limp, no fear, just a kind of resignation that, in the end, a man always reaps what he sows. They'd caught him 2 weeks earlier, bleeding from the ribs with a bounty tag already stuffed in his coat pocket. Word had it he'd robbed a federal stage with his blood brother, Jonas Pike, and left a child dead in the crossfire. Some said the boy was only 6. Others whispered it was just a baby still in swaddling. None of them knew for sure, but it didn't matter. Out here, guilt didn't need facts, just a name and a rope. The preacher stepped forward, a worn Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. His voice wavered in the dry air. "Elijah Ward, do you have any last words before you meet your maker?" Eli's boots shifted on the wood, creaking softly. He looked out over the crowd. Familiar faces. Angry ones. Curious ones. A few turned away, unable to look him in the eye. But not all. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Took a breath. The rope hung beside him, swaying gently in the breeze like a cruel pendulum. His voice came low at first, then stronger. "You think you know me," he said. "Think you know what I did. But you only heard one story, and he's standing right there." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wildfire. Faces turned. One man stepped back from the cluster, tall, dark hat low over his brow, coat pulled tight around his shoulders. Jonas Pike. He didn't flinch, not outwardly, but his jaw twitched. Eli's smile cracked and bitter. "Didn't expect to see you today, brother." The sheriff glanced between them, hand tightening on his revolver. "You saying Jonas had a hand in this?" "I'm saying he pulled the trigger." The crowd burst into shouts. Someone yelled, "Liar." Another, "Let him speak." The preacher raised his hands to quiet them, but the mood had shifted. Tension settled over the square like heat before a storm. 2 weeks earlier, the sun had been just as cruel, the sky just as wide. Eli and Jonas had crouched behind a ridge of sun-bleached rock, watching the federal stagecoach trundle up the canyon path. 6 horses, 2 guards. The lockbox glinted like a promise beneath the driver's seat. Jonas had looked over with a grin, teeth white against sunburned skin. "Easy pickings, brother. 1 shot to the lead horse, and they're all ours." Eli had nodded, but something in him tightened. It used to be a thrill, this life. The chase, the draw, the spoils. But lately, it felt like dragging his boots through mud. There was no fire anymore. No meaning. Just motion. The ambush went too well. 1 guard dead before he hit the ground. The driver took a bullet through the neck. The horses scattered. Eli opened the strong box, while Jonas stood watch, gun drawn. He could hear the wind and the shrill scream of a child, then a shot. 1 sharp crack. He turned to see Jonas lowering his pistol. A small figure lay, crumpled behind the coach. A boy, just standing in the wrong place. Eli's stomach lurched. "You shot a kid," he said, almost not believing it. "He saw my face." He wasn't armed. Jonas turned, eyes flat. "A witness is a witness, Eli. You want to get hung for a bleeding heart." That was the moment something broke between them. Not loudly, not with fire or curses. Just broke, like a snapped gear in a ticking clock. Eli turned back to the gold, but his hands shook. Jonas walked up behind him and muttered, "You lost your nerve." And then came the shot. Not from a lawman, not from ambush. From Jonas's own Colt, aimed at Eli's side. It tore through him, and the ground came up fast. He saw boots, blood, heard horses. Jonas took the gold and rode off, leaving Eli to bleed under the wide sky. The last thing he remembered was the buzz of flies and the smell of mesquite. They found him 2 days later. Claythorne and his men, bounty hunters more vicious than wolves. They patched him up just enough to ride, bound his hands, and dragged him to Rust Creek with a poster that read dead or alive. In the jail, days blurred. The walls sweated in the midday heat. His wound throbbed like a second heart. A rat made its home beneath the cot, and sometimes he whispered to it just to hear his own voice. One night, the preacher came. Silas Boone, long white beard, skin like cracked leather. I's too kind for this place. You seeking forgiveness, son? Eli looked up, blinking slowly. Don't reckon I've earned it. No man earns grace. That's what makes it grace. Eli chuckled dryly. You ever shot a man, preacher? Silas didn't answer. They say I killed a kid. That true? Silas hesitated. Some say, some doubt. Most just want peace. Peace. Eli spat. Funny how quick they want peace when it comes with a hanging. He thought of Ruth that night. Thought of her voice, low and sharp like a knife you didn't see coming. They'd met in Missouri, back before the war, before the killing. She'd wanted to be a healer. He'd wanted to be free. In the end, they both failed. She'd left him at the edge of that life, told him she wouldn't patch up wounds made by greed anymore. He walked out and never looked back. Not until the bullet in his side made him wonder what kind of man she might have helped him become if he'd just stayed. Now on the gallows, Eli kept his gaze locked on Jonas. You gonna speak, brother? Or let them string me up for your sin? Jonas stepped forward. He's delirious. Been mad since the canyon. Shot himself, maybe. You said you never saw me after the robbery. I said what I needed to say. You always do. Claythorne shoved through the crowd, pistol raised. That's enough. This ain't a courtroom. It ought to be, the preacher said, surprising everyone. If a man's to die, let him die for what he did, not for what another man did in shadows. Jonas turned toward him. You siding with the killer, Boone? I'm siding with truth. Eli looked around. The crowd was shifting. Doubts rising like dust from the dirt. A boy near the front, maybe 10, watched him wide-eyed. Eli met his gaze and wondered if the dead child had looked the same. I won't ask for forgiveness, he said. Not for the things I've done. But I'll speak the truth if y'all care to hear it. Some nodded. Others folded arms. One man shouted, Let the bastard hang already. Eli took a breath. The rope brushed his shoulder. Jonas Pike pulled the trigger that killed the boy. I saw it. Then he shot me and took the gold. I was bleeding in the canyon when Claythorne found me. He didn't ask no questions, just saw the bounty and figured I'd fetch a decent purse. Thorne stepped forward, red-faced. You calling me a liar? I'm calling you what you are, a man who knows a warm body makes money and a dead one don't talk. A scuffle broke out near the rear of the crowd. A woman pushed her way forward, shawl wrapped tight. She stopped at the front, face pale. Ruth. Her voice was ice. I saw the boy. Everyone turned. He was alive when Eli left the canyon, she said. I found him later. Shot clean through. But Eli was gone. Only one set of fresh tracks left behind. Jonas took a step back. She's lying. I was a battlefield nurse, Ruth said. I know what blood tells me. Silence fell like a hammer. Jonas reached for his gun. Too slow. A shot cracked the stillness. Smoke curled from the sheriff's revolver. Jonas fell to his knees, clutching his shoulder. The crowd surged forward, then back again. Claythorne backed away, gun half raised, uncertain now. The sheriff turned to Eli. This don't make you innocent, but it gives me pause. Eli met his gaze. That's all I ever wanted. The noose hung empty. For now. As the sheriff led Jonas off, Ruth approached the platform. Eli looked down at her, shame hollowing his chest. You came. I shouldn't have, she said, but the truth deserves a witness. He nodded. Reckon I owe you everything. You owe me nothing, Eli. Just don't waste what comes next. The crowd began to disperse, murmurs trailing behind like dying echoes. The gallows creaked in the wind, still swaying with the memory of a death that didn't come. Eli Ward, blood-stained outlaw, stepped down from the platform. Alive for now, but in a town like Rust Creek, survival was never a promise. Just a chance. The first shot rang out just as Eli's boot hit the dirt. He felt the bullet whistle past his temple, close enough to tug his hair, and threw himself sideways into the dust. The crowd screamed. Women scattered, children ducked under wagons. The gallows loomed behind him like a black omen, rope swinging wildly in the wind. Jonas Pike had vanished into the chaos, like smoke in a sandstorm. A second shot cracked, and the preacher went down, clutching his side. Eli rolled, grabbed the deputy's dropped rifle, and scanned the rooftops. He caught a flash of movement, a long coat, a glint of metal. But then a hand grabbed his collar and yanked him backward. "Move! Damn you!" hissed a voice near his ear. Before he could see who it was, he was being dragged through the crush of bodies and into the alley beside the general store. Muffled screams followed them. Another gunshot. Glass shattered behind them. Eli stumbled, groaned, clutched at his old wound, and looked up. Mariah. She was older than he remembered, taller, too, but her eyes were the same sharp cut of amber, like shards of autumn. Dressed in a leather coat patched with old cavalry cloth, 2 pistols strapped crosswise at her hips. Her black braid whipped behind her like a snake's tail. He blinked. "Thought you were dead." She smirked. "You always think that. Come on." They ran. Rust Creek disappeared behind them. No time for explanation, no time for goodbyes. They slipped out through the abandoned stockyards, stole 2 horses tethered near the smith's barn, and galloped west across the open flats. The land stretched wide and unforgiving, a quilt of scorched prairie and jagged mesas. The sun crawled low, dragging shadows long behind them. By nightfall, they were deep in the high country, where the pines swallowed sound and the stars flickered like lanterns strung by ghosts. They stopped near a dry creek bed to rest the horses. Eli slid from the saddle and leaned against a rock, breath ragged, vision swaying. Mariah knelt by him, tore open his shirt. "Damn fool, you tore the stitches." Hadn't planned on a public execution turning into a gunfight. She snorted, poured whiskey over the wound. He clenched his teeth, but didn't cry out. "How'd you know I'd need saving?" "I've been tracking Jonas for weeks. Heard he was hiding in Rust Creek. Then I heard about your hanging. Figured the 2 had to be tied. They're more than tied. He shot me. Left me to die. I figured that part out too." She bound the wound tightly, eyes flicking up to meet his. "You still bleed the same, Eli." He tried to laugh, but coughed instead. "And you still patch me up just before you cuss me out." Her face softened. "I never got to thank you for Red Bluff." He nodded, remembering. She'd been a scout for a band of Cheyenne who got caught between a cavalry patrol and a gold-hungry land grabber. Eli had helped her escape with her family. Cost him a bounty and 3 months on the run. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know." Silence settled between them. Coyotes howled in the distance. "We can't go back," Eli said finally. "Not yet. Jonas'll have half the town believing he's the victim." Mariah sat beside him, tossing a pine cone into the fire. "Then we gather what we need. The truth. Witnesses. Proof." "I've got no proof." "But I do," she said. He looked at her. "What kind?" "Old letters. From Ruth. She saw the boy after the robbery. Wrote down what she found. I've got him tucked in a saddlebag." His chest tightened. Ruth. He hadn't thought of her voice in days, but now it came back like thunder on dry hills. The way she used to look at him, like he was both salvation and curse. "Where is she now?" Mariah hesitated. "West of here, hiding out in the bones of Fort Ransom. She treats wounded trappers wanderers, folk who don't belong nowhere." Eli stood slowly wincing. "Then we ride." They left before dawn, following a ravine that twisted like a broken river through the hills. Snow still clung to the shadows, even though the sun rose hot and bright. Eli's wound reopened once, and Mariah forced them to stop, rebind it, and force him to drink water laced with something bitter and herbal. By the second night, the stars were washed away by thick, low clouds, and a cold wind cut through even their coats. Mariah found shelter beneath a ledge, and they camped in silence. "You ever think about stopping?" he asked, voice low. Mariah stared into the fire. Stopping what? Running. Fighting. All of it. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was flat. Only cowards get to stop. Or corpses. He nodded. Yeah, me too. The next day, they reached the ruins of Fort Ransom. The walls had long since crumbled, overtaken by moss and wind. A single building remained half-standing, roof caved in, windows shuttered with hide and old timber. Ruth answered the door. She wore a coat stitched from bear hide and a scarf wrapped around her neck. Her face was harder now, but her eyes, those hadn't changed. She didn't speak for a long moment, just looked at Eli like he was some ghost she hadn't decided whether to bless or banish. You're supposed to be dead, she said finally, getting real tired of hearing that. She stepped aside. Come in, before you bleed all over the porch. Inside, the place smelled of salt, firewood, and crushed sage. Blankets hung along the walls. A single cot stood in the corner. A boy no older than 12 lay asleep on it, wrapped in furs. His leg was gone from the knee down. Ruth nodded toward him. Bear trap. Eli looked away. You still fixin' the broken ones, huh? She ignored the jab. Sit. I'll look at that wound. She peeled away the bandage, clucked her tongue, and worked in silence. Mariah stood near the door, arms crossed, watching both of them. I saw the boy, Ruth said after a while. The one Jonas shot. You were there. I came after, looking for you. Found the wagon. The child. The blood trail. She glanced at him. Yours. Eli felt the weight of it all press against his chest. I didn't pull that trigger. I know. He looked at her. So, why didn't you speak up before? She tightened the last knot in the bandage. I wasn't ready to face you. Or the town. Or the noise that comes with all of it. You are now. I am now. He studied her face. There were lines there that hadn't been before. Shadows beneath the eyes. But strength too. The kind forged in loss. I still care, he said quietly. I don't, she replied, just as softly. But I care about justice. Mariah placed the saddlebag on the table. These yours? Ruth opened it, pulled out the letters. Her eyes flicked over the words, face tightening. I wrote these for myself, so I wouldn't forget the truth. We need them, Eli said. Need to show Rust Creek what Jonas really is. She folded the papers carefully. I'll come with you. Eli blinked. You sure? I don't want you standing alone, Eli. Not again. They left Fort Ransom at sunrise, 3 riders on a road that had no map, only purpose. The wind had changed, carried a smell of rain and tension. Near the river bend, they were ambushed, not by bounty hunters, wolves, 4 of them, lean and desperate, driven mad by hunger. The first lunged at Eli's horse, dragging it down with a vicious snap. He tumbled to the ground, rolled, drew his revolver, fired twice. 1 wolf dropped. The others circled. Mariah fired from the saddle, killing another. Ruth screamed. Her horse reared, but she held on. Eli scrambled to his feet, clutching his ribs. A wolf leapt. He caught it midair with the barrel of his gun, knocked it aside, shot it as it scrambled up. Mariah dispatched the last one with a knife to the throat. Silence fell again. They stood among blood and panting horses, adrenaline surging. You all right? Eli asked, limping to Ruth. She nodded, breathless. You. Always. Mariah wiped her blade. Let's keep moving. We've still got a truth to tell. By the time they reached the edge of Rust Creek, night had fallen again. The town lights glowed dim beneath the cloud cover. The gallows had been repaired. Fresh rope hung, waiting. Mariah pulled her hat low. They'll shoot you on sight. Maybe, Eli said, but maybe not if I walk in with the truth on both sides. He looked at Ruth. She nodded. And then he looked out at the town, not with anger, not with fear, but with something harder to kill. Purpose. The kind that either carves your name in legend or buries you in silence. The air over Rust Creek was still as death, thick with the tension of an old wound reopened. Midnight was crawling toward morning, but the town didn't sleep. Lanterns flickered in windows, shadows shifted behind curtains, and in the heart of the square, the gallows waited once more, weathered wood creaking softly in the breeze, the noose swaying like a question left hanging too long. Eli Ward rode in slow, hat pulled low, Ruth and Mariah flanking him like ghosts come to settle debts. Hooves clopped over packed earth. Dogs barked and were quickly silenced. Somewhere a man coughed and a woman whispered a prayer. The three riders moved with the purpose of something fated, not chosen. The sheriff met them halfway, standing just beyond the old water trough with a shotgun braced across his arms. He looked tired, as though the last few days had wrung what little belief he had in justice clean out of him. "You sure you want to be seen here?" he asked. Eli dismounted slowly, boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. "I came to finish what started on that scaffold. You might end up right back on it. Then let's make damn sure it's for the right reason this time." Behind them, a crowd was already forming. Word traveled fast in places like Rust Creek. News of Eli's escape, the gunfire, the ambush, it had spread like brush fire. Now, folks came not just for blood, but for truth, the kind that changed men or damned them forever. Mariah handed Ruth the leather pouch with the letters. Ruth took them, her face calm but unreadable, the documents cradled like something sacred. Eli stepped forward into the square. "I've got something to say," he called out. The sheriff hesitated, then stepped back. Voices murmured in the dark. The preacher, alive but bandaged, stood on the edge of the crowd, leaning heavy on a cane. He nodded once. That was enough. Eli climbed the scaffold steps slowly, deliberately. He stood where the noose had brushed his shoulder, just days before, turned to face the townspeople who had nearly watched him die. "I ain't a man of many speeches," he said. "Never was. But if I'm going to hang, I want the truth in the air first." A hush settled. All ears turned to him. All eyes fixed. 2 weeks ago, a boy was shot during a robbery. You were told I did it. You were ready to hang me for it. But the one who pulled the trigger, he's been walking free, hiding behind the kind of lies that rot a town from the inside out. He raised a hand and pointed. "To hell with shadows. Jonas Pike come out?" There was a moment, one beat, then two, before a movement rippled from the rear of the crowd. Jonas stepped into the torchlight, flanked by Claythorne and 2 men with rifles. His left arm hung in a sling from a sheriff's shot. His eyes were dark as pitch and twice as mean. "You got no right speaking my name, traitor," he spat. "I got every right," Eli said, voice steady. "You put a bullet in me, left me for dead. You killed that child. And then you let this town think I was the devil come to collect." Jonas laughed. "Ain't no one gonna believe a killer's word." Ruth stepped forward then, letters clutched in her hands. "Maybe they'll believe mine." She mounted the scaffold beside Eli, her voice cutting clean through the crowd. "These are my words, dated and signed. I found the child after the robbery. He was shot in the back. The trail of blood didn't lead to Eli, it led away from the crime, toward the ridge where one rider fled alone." Clay stepped forward, jaw clenched. "That proves nothing. You could have written that yesterday." Mariah took a step beside Ruth, her voice sharp. "Then ask why Jonas left a bounty marker on Eli's body. Ask who stood to profit from the lie." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. The sheriff raised a hand. "Jonas, you deny shooting the boy?" "I do," he said flatly. "Then why run?" "Because this bastard turned on me. We were both in it." "Then why is he the one with a bullet in his ribs and not you?" Jonas hesitated. It was only a second, but it was enough. Clay motioned to his men. "That's enough talk. Arrest them." Ruth shouted, "You think you can bury truth under guns?" One of the deputies faltered. The other raised his rifle. But the sheriff moved first, stepping between them, his voice loud and sharp. "No one's pulling iron unless it's on me." Clay barked. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Will? I think I've watched this town rot from the inside while we let men like you write the rules. I think maybe it's time someone said no more." Jonas reached for his gun with his good hand, but Mariah had hers drawn before his finger found the trigger. One shot, clean, efficient, struck the pistol from his grip. It clattered to the dirt. He cried out, clutching his wrist. Blood seeped between his fingers. Eli stepped down from the scaffold. Mariah covered Jonas. Ruth handed the letters to the sheriff. Clay raised his weapon. You think this changes anything? You think his crowd will care come morning? The preacher's voice cut through the tension like the bell of judgment. They care now. He stepped forward, came digging into the ground with each step a slow, deliberate march. I've watched this town too long to stay silent. We nearly hanged an innocent man because we were too tired to ask the right questions. That ends tonight. Clay took one look around and knew he'd lost. He tried to turn, to slip back into the dark, but the sheriff blocked his path. You're under arrest, he said. For what? Clay snapped. Corruption, bounty fraud, and accomplice to attempted murder. Clay drew, but the crowd surged. 3 men tackled him to the ground. One kicked his weapon away. A woman spat on his face. Jonas was disarmed, hands tied behind his back. He snarled at Eli as they dragged him toward the jail. This ain't over. You don't get to ride off clean. Eli looked at him ice cold. I ain't clean, but at least I ain't you. With the noose swinging above them, the truth finally laid bare, and the townsfolk watching in stunned silence, the gallows no longer seemed like a symbol of justice, only failure. The sheriff ordered it dismantled. The beams were chopped and burned by dawn. Ruth stood at the edge of the square, watching the flames, the letters clutched in her hand. Eli approached quietly. You didn't have to come back, she said. Maybe not, but I had to finish it. She turned to him. So what now? I reckon I ride. You always do. He reached into his coat, pulled out something wrapped in an old bandana, a silver locket. I carried it every day, he said. She didn't take it, just looked at him. Sadness softening the corners of her eyes. I don't need it, she said, but I'm glad you did. He nodded. The pain of her letting go hit harder than any wound. Mariah waited with the horses, reins loose in her hand. She looked at Eli as he approached. You done? Not sure I ever will be. They mounted up. The sheriff gave them a nod. Not approval, but respect. The kind earned with blood and stubborn truth. As they rode out of Rust Creek, the sky behind them turned to fire with the morning sun. Dust kicked up under their hooves, and the wind smelled of ash pine and something new. Hope, maybe. Or just distance. Eli glanced back once, saw Ruth still standing in the square, coat flapping in the wind, face turned toward the sunrise. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just let the road pull him forward. Some stories don't end with a kiss or a gallows. Some end with a man riding west, scars beneath his shirt and silence in his throat. Some end with justice, not the clean kind, but the kind that scrapes and bruises and leaves you standing with dirt on your boots and no bullets in your gun. And some don't end at all, because the frontier rolls on, endless as regret. So, what do we take from this tale? Maybe it's this: the West didn't make men. It tested them, burned away the lies until only truth remained. And if you're lucky, that truth doesn't kill you. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now, tell me, what would you have done standing before the noose? The desert didn't forget. It buried bones, dried out blood-swallowed screams, but it never forgot. And neither did Eli Ward. 3 weeks had passed since Rust Creek, since the rope had nearly snapped his neck, since Jonas Pike had been shackled and thrown behind iron, and since Ruth had turned away without saying goodbye. Now the horizon stretched ahead, vast, cracked, and sun-scoured. Nothing but distance between him and the town he'd nearly died in. But there was one thing that didn't sit right. Jonas had whispered something before they hauled him off, something meant to dig in and fester. Asterisk, you think I was working alone? Asterisk, Eli had let the words drift on the wind that day, chalked it up to a coward's bluff. But the more he rode, the more it scratched at him. Every night at camp, staring into the fire, it whispered back. The robbery, the bounty, the setup, it had all been too smooth, too convenient. Claythorne had known where he was. The town had been ready with the rope before the ink was dry on the posters. Jonas may have been the trigger man, but he hadn't been the architect. Mariah noticed it first, how his shoulders stayed tight even when the fire was warm, how he kept checking their back trail. She finally said it plain while patching a split in his saddle strap. "You're not running from something," she said. "You're chasing it." Eli didn't answer. She stood, crossed her arms. "Tell me who." He exhaled slow, like the truth weighed more than lead. "Jonas didn't set me up alone. Someone higher. Someone who knew the bounty routes, the schedule, maybe even someone in the marshal's office." Mariah frowned. "That's a hell of a guess." "It's a certainty." They rode south, toward Copper Bend, a mining town swallowed by greed and grit, where lawmen sold badges like whiskey. Eli had a name in mind, one he hadn't spoken aloud in years: Nathaniel Bragg. Back when Eli rode with the Ward gang, 6 men and a half-mad scout, who thought he was Apache, Bragg had been their go-between. A fixer. Smart. Educated. Wore a coat slicker than any outlaw had a right to. When the law started tightening, Bragg vanished. Rumor was he'd gone respectable, married into a railroad family, cleaned up his hands, and left the rest of them to burn. But Eli remembered something else. Bragg's eyes, they never looked at you like you were a partner. They looked at you like you were a tool. Temporary. Disposable. Copper Bend came into view at dusk, a cluster of low buildings and flickering lanterns crouched at the edge of a jagged canyon. The air stank of sulfur and crushed stone. Men moved like ghosts through the dust, blackened hands clutching pickaxes and bottles. Somewhere, a woman laughed without joy. Eli and Mariah tethered their horses outside the saloon, a 2-story timber and brick affair that sagged like it was ashamed of itself. The sign swung crooked in the wind, the Lucky Stack. Inside, smoke curled like a living thing. Piano music drifted in lazy, broken notes. A bartender with one eye polished a glass with a cloth that didn't look much cleaner. Nobody looked up when they entered, at least not openly. Eli scanned the room. Booth in the far corner. Velvet curtain half drawn. 2 men in coats that didn't fit this town. Polished boots. Clean collars. One of them was Bragg. He hadn't changed much. Still wore his hair slicked back. Still kept a pocket watch visible on his vest like it meant something. He didn't recognize Eli at first, not until Eli stepped into the booth's shadow. "Well, I'll be," Bragg said, smiling like a man who just spotted a loose thread on someone else's coat. The ghost of Eli Ward. Eli sat without invitation. Mariah leaned against the nearby post, arms folded, pistol visible. Her silence said she wasn't here to drink. "Thought you were dangling from a rope," Bragg said. "Nearly was." "What changed?" "The rope didn't get its wish." Bragg chuckled, poured himself a drink. "You always had a knack for slipping through nooses." Eli didn't smile. "You set me up." Bragg paused mid-pour. Bold accusation. "You fed Jonas the plan. The route. You leaked the bounty price. You put Clay Thorne on my trail." Bragg finished pouring, raised the glass. "You ever think maybe it wasn't personal?" Eli leaned forward. "You framed me to clean up a mess. To erase the past. I was never meant to walk out of Rust Creek." Bragg sighed. "You're a relic, Eli. A remnant. You think the world stopped spinning after the war? You think men like us still have a place?" Eli's jaw tightened. "We made your place. You made chaos. I made something lasting." Mariah stepped forward. "Lasting like a grave." Bragg looked at her, tilting his head. "Ah, the Cheyenne Scout. I remember you. Thought you died in Red Bluff." "You wish I had." Bragg's eyes darkened. "You don't have proof." Ruth stepped from behind the curtain. She wore a travel-worn coat and dust-covered boots, face shadowed beneath her hat. "I brought the proof," she said. "Letters, documents, witness names." Bragg blinked, then laughed softly. "You drag her into this too?" "She dragged herself," Eli said. A door creaked open near the bar. 2 more of Bragg's men stepped in. The saloon tensed. The bartender ducked without looking like he was ducking. Eli stood, slow and deliberate. "You pull iron here, you better be ready to bleed. And you better hope I'm not the one standing after." Bragg didn't move. He just looked at Eli like a man watching the tide come in too fast. "You've made a mistake." "No," Ruth said. "You did. Years ago. And now it's here, standing in front of you." Bragg reached into his coat. Eli tensed, but it wasn't a gun. It was a ledger. He tossed it on the table. Every payout, every bounty, every name. You want the truth? It's all there. Eli opened the book. Pages of neat, cruel handwriting. Amounts beside initials. W backslash to W for Ward. JP for Pike. CT for Thorne. And there, NB backslash $5,000. For the stagecoach job. Insurance fraud, Bragg said. Marshall gets a cut, I get paid, and a few bodies disappear. You just didn't stay dead. Eli shut the book. Mariah's voice was low. What now? We ride, Eli said. Bragg's smirk returned. You think this town will care? No, Eli said, but the next one might. Ruth stepped close to Bragg. And if they don't, I will. Bragg didn't blink. You're not killers anymore. Eli looked at him. No, we're truth-tellers now. That should scare you more. They turned to go. One of Bragg's men reached for his gun. Too late. Mariah shot first. The man hit the floor hard, moaning. Ruth had her pistol up next, pointed at the second man who froze mid-draw. Eli kept walking. Out into the heat. Out into the stinking air of Copper Bend. The ledger tucked under his arm, the fire burning hotter than the desert sun. They rode hard through the night. At sunrise, they stopped by a cliff overlooking a dry valley. Below, a caravan of wagons rolled slow, banners marked with federal stamps. Soldiers, merchants, lawmen. Eli looked at Ruth. You sure? She nodded. Time to make the truth known. He turned to Mariah. You still riding with me? She smiled faintly. You still worth following? He paused. Guess we'll find out. Then they rode, three shadows against the rising light. Some stories don't end with a noose or a gun. Some end with a ride. But this one's just getting started.